There we go. Excellent. So we turn time over now to Chelsea for the beginning of our presentation tonight.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for letting us join tonight. I do have had one of my fellow recruiters, Liam, come with me as well. Just thought that he could help give some good insight. So we have a small little presentation. We made a few slides just to kind of show what we're talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and try to smoothly share my screen if it'll let me and pull that up. So hopefully that goes smooth.
You should be able to. So.
Where's that?
We can see it.
Okay.
All right. There we go.
Perfect. So first, we just have some resume tips. These are some things that not only we've seen between the two of us, we talked to some other recruiters in our office, and then these are just some things that we've heard from hiring managers as well. So first and foremost is use your space wisely. You know, most resumes get reviewed in less than 30 seconds by the hiring manager, the team looking at it. So they want them to be easy to read, easy to digest, not overly wordy. And then recently we've been getting a lot of feedback, you know, from resumes we've seen that are in fonts or text that's not black. They kind of just want it to look standard. So pretty simple with that. Another thing that we've noticed recently is just tailoring your resume to the position you have in mind, but keeping your original template. So, you know, having a base one, but then maybe throwing in some extra focuses on certain technologies or, you know, different projects that you worked on or something that might be exciting based off of the, you know, company that you're applying to. And then listing out what you did specifically, not just what your team did. So it's great to say that your team worked on a project or was using a specific technology, but putting what you did just kind of helps you stand out. And then it's going to be easier for you to speak about what you did and not saying, oh, well, my team did this, my team did that. But you can talk more of like, oh, well, I did this. This is how I used it. I used it daily, weekly, whatever. Just kind of makes it a little easier. And then not having it completely look like you just copy and pasted it from the job description. That's another thing that we hear a lot is it looks like somebody just went in and pasted the job description into their resume, and that's not what they're looking for. You want to use that as your baseline because you want to, you know, speak to what you know. But it's just easier to not do that. Another reason is because they will ask you. So if you copy and paste something straight from a job description, they might ask you to explain that. And if you're not able to speak on it, then they're going to know that that's maybe not something you're as familiar with. So
I'd say 9 times out of 10, when there is something like that, where you're putting relevant information into the job description, they will ask you about it because it's in the top 3. That's what they're looking for, those kind of things. So that's a great point. All right. So for job searching tips, what we like to start with is making sure you have an updated LinkedIn. Make sure you put a good professional photo on there. Lots of people don't have a profile picture on LinkedIn, and sometimes it's just nice for hiring managers or us as recruiters just to see who someone is. It's not the most important thing, but it definitely just kind of brings you up on the list. The next thing is keep both your resume and your LinkedIn profile as current as possible. And one of the things that we have noticed recently is regarding certifications. we'll come across somebody and then they tell us way down the line that they have all these certifications, and then we're thinking, well, why didn't you put them in your LinkedIn or your resume? It just helps you stand out even more. And then I'm sure a lot of you know this, but the easiest way to get a job is through other people that you know, right? If you are a referral from an employee at a company, you're way more likely to get the position than you are if you were just applying to the job online. So work your network, and if your network doesn't have anything for you, ask your network for other referrals. So just keep working that network and you'll get there. And then the next thing is, if you're not having luck going through an agency like Tech Systems or STG, try reaching out to an internal recruiter. We like to help our candidates out a lot, and that's one of the benefits of working through an agency is we will walk you through every step of the process, whereas internal recruiters, not so much. But if you're trying to get into maybe a niche position and none of the agencies have anything, try going internal. And if you do have any friends in the space who are trying to get in at an entry level, I would definitely try reaching out internally first. Anything else?
Yeah, I would say just like with the working your network can be anyone. I know sometimes we think of that as like just the people we know that work in a certain space, but it really is just your friends, your family, the people you talk to on a daily basis. Sometimes you don't know where somebody works, even if there's someone that you talk to. So if you're ever looking, just make sure the people in your life know that you're looking. I know that's something that we do just here, especially internally at Tech Systems. We're always looking for internal for like referrals first, and anyone who's looking for anything. So it's just something to keep in mind. And again, this was mentioned in the intro, even if you just have jobs available, like it's going to help just continue to build your network by just bringing up those common, these are the jobs we're seeing, or, I'm looking currently. So just always, we stress network a lot here just for what we do on a daily basis, but I think that's the most important one.
100%. All right. I think that's all from us.
If anyone had any specific questions or anything you want us to dive in a little bit deeper on or explain a little more, we're happy to.
So I'll make a comment, not really a question. So I was working for a company out of Washington State when we moved here to Utah. And the very first thing that I did once we got here is I started looking for networking opportunities. And for me, it was in the form of computer groups and user groups. I found this group before it kind of died and then was reborn. I found the software craftsmanship group and I joined them. Not that I was looking for a job at the time, but because it becomes critical at some point in time to have that network. And sure enough, the next time I was ready to look for a job, I had people there who were like, hey, Caleb, come and work with me. So we can start that now with or without a job, and ideally before we have that need.
I love that, Caleb. Perfect. All right. Well, I guess we'll pass it over to the other presenters.
Yeah, just before we do that, I also have something else to add. It's kind of on the resume and skills highlighting, and it kind of ties into our actual user group and some of the networking, and that is some of you who've been here for a while. I probably know that I just recently switched jobs, and one of the things that allowed me I think to stand out as I was recruited for the company that I've joined was being able to highlight on my resume presentations that I've done. Having presented to this user group, having presented to the JavaScript at a JavaScript conference here in Salt Lake, and to a couple of the other local conferences. I think that's an opportunity that a lot of people don't take advantage of. And it's a great way, first, to network. You will meet a ton of people as you start to do presentations, but it also highlights that you have dived into some specific areas of technology that are important to your career. And not only do you have kind of at least a foundational understanding, it also highlights that you have the ability to communicate clearly and explain ideas clearly. And so we'll give you a pitch every single meetup for the fact that we're looking for presenters, and it's a fantastic opportunity. So take advantage of not just coming to user group meetings like this, but starting to build your skills at doing presentations and then adding those skills to your resume. Does anybody else have anything about resumes and the initial job search before we turn it over to Angie and Matt for interview prep and tips?
Are there any new or good sources? Looks like Alberto has a question too, but for people who don't look for jobs all the time, where do you recommend looking? And are there certain conditions where you go one way versus another?
I would say LinkedIn, I feel like is a good place to start. I know, again, I know we've already talked about networking and the importance of like people that you know. So those are generally the two things that I start to recommend first is see what's available on LinkedIn. You can narrow it down, you can search a lot more. And then from there, just start talking to people that you know. And again, that's really just anyone. And it's just like letting them know that you're looking. I recently just had like a close friend of mine. She was looking for a job, and those were the two things I told her. I was like, hey, go to LinkedIn first, like make sure that's up to date, start searching there. I was like, and then just every time you're out with a friend, family, doesn't matter where you are, just tell them like, oh yeah, I'm like currently looking for a job. Do you know of anyone? And through that's actually how she found her current job. It's not in tech, or I'd dive in a little bit deeper, but it was just interesting to see how those things really played out for her, because all it took was her talking to people and she ended up finding another job.
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
Great. Alberto, you had a question. If you want to come off mute and go ahead and ask it.
Thank you for taking my question, guys. It is a very specific question related to resume. I did recently I did write my resume one page. I did fit in one page all I have worked on since 2013. Instead of grabbing my old resume and dust it and going through all the things that I have done since 2001, I just decided to fit in what I have done so recently in one page. Is it an advantage, or is there any benefit in making it a one page versus 2-page resume?
I would say no. Having a longer resume is not a negative. I would say I wouldn't do anything over maybe going into a 3rd page, I think is way too long. But as long as you can fit it, preferably in 2, but if you do need to stretch it over to 3 because you do have relevant experience that you need to share, I think that's a good idea. But yeah, you don't need to cut it down to 1 page just because you feel like you need to make it shorter.
Okay, and here is a follow-up to that idea. My intention was to create another page because I did grab a template from a tweet that I came across with a very nice 1-page template. I just filled in the spaces, but to talk about what I have done since 2001, my plan was to create a 2nd page, which is not really an extension of the first, but a 2nd page with all the stuff that I have done since 2001 to 2013. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, I would think as long as it's relevant experience to what you're looking for, that is good. Okay. I would say, and I think Lynn would agree, I think most of the resumes we see are about 2 pages because it's listing out, skills, projects, and then just work experience, that's goes back, like you said, back to 2001. Again, I think it's really important to just have the relevant work experience when you have so much.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. And Alberto, just to touch a little more on that, I would say, say you started out as a customer support representative in IT. That's completely okay experience to put in there, whereas I wouldn't put your experience working at a restaurant or something like that. So it's just
I see. Oh, I see. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, no
You're
worries.
welcome.
Thanks. All right, so what I think we're going to do is, so Alex had his hand up, and then we've had a couple of questions come in on the chat. In the interest of time, I think we'll have Alex ask his question, and then I know Ron and Haz have had, both have mentioned that they have questions in the chat. Haz, if you'll enter your question into the chat, I'll keep a log of those. And then after we have the STG presentation, we'll have some open panel time, and we'll go back and ask the rest of the questions. So Alex, why don't you come off mute and go ahead and ask your question?
So you said not to have colored text, but what like other like color blocks on your resume, just little splashes of color? Is that good or frowned upon or
I
neutral?
would say, honestly, just be careful. We say it because this actually just happened recently. We were sitting on a call with one of our clients, and there was a few candidates in, and immediately the hiring manager was turned off by a resume that was, and we didn't think anything of it because it was in like a navy, like a blue, like a navy blue. We thought, it looked fine. But he made a point to talk about it. And then we kind of brought it up to our office, and we just got a lot of feedback from other people saying that they've just heard that they don't like that because sometimes it could just look weird on somebody's screen, and that's just a turn off to them.
Exactly. If it looks great on your computer, it could look completely different on someone else's. So that's why we recommend just keeping it black and white.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Thanks, everybody. And again, if you have questions, you can type them in the chat, or we will have some open time at the end of the presentation. We do want to turn the time over to our presenters from STG for interview prep and tips.
Hey, thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. So Matt and I are super excited to be here. We are new to the .NET group, the .NET user group from Software Technology Group. So we're really excited to have this opportunity to present today. I was asked to talk about interview preparation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then Matt's going to talk more about the actual interview process and giving some tips and tricks on that. So I'm sharing my screen. Can you guys all see my screen okay? Yeah. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, like I said, about interview preparation. A few things that you really want to do is, in preparation for your interview is to actually look at your invite and make sure that you confirm, the date, the time, that you're really clear on that. And other things you want to check on is that how the interview is going to be done. If it's going to be over the phone, if somebody's going to be calling you, or if it's going to be on screen, whether or not it's going to be on Zoom, or if it's going to be on Teams, what platform it's going to be on, or, if you're going to have to be there in person. If it's, going to be on Zoom, then you want to make sure, of course, you have an account with Zoom or whatever is needed to be able to log in quickly. And I also always recommend that you test your cameras, you test your sound to make sure everything's working beforehand. I've had interviews, where people have come on and I can't hear them, or their camera's pointing down, or they're looking to the side, and it can be really distracting as the interviewer. And I want to make sure that I can look at people, look at their face and be able to talk to them and make eye contact with them. I think it's just a really big thing in presentation, body language, all of that. So make sure everything works well beforehand. And also make sure if you're interviewing online, you want to make sure that your background is nice and clean, organized. You don't want to have a bunch of chaos behind. I interviewed somebody one time and they were sitting on their porch in the middle of winter with all of their junk on their porch. And I was like, what is happening? It was a little crazy. So just be aware of that, of how you want to present to people. You want to make sure that you're professional and, that you look professional. And let's see. Oh, also you want to make sure that you review your job description. I like to do that. I suggest you do it right before you do the interview, just to refresh your memory. And I always suggest to my candidates that they make a list next to the requirements, the job requirements, and jot down some ideas or thoughts about how you meet their requirements. And then dress and appearance. At STG, we always suggest that you dress one level up from the place that you're going to be interviewing with. So if they're going to be wearing jeans and t-shirts, then maybe you go and you wear a nice collared shirt, you know, a polo shirt and a pair of khakis. For women, it's obviously a little different, some dress pants and a nice blouse. Or, you know, if they dress in polo shirts and khakis, then you go one up and you wear maybe a sport coat, or maybe wear a tie or a dress shirt. Always just make sure also that you use appropriate language. You know, you might really hit it off with the hiring manager and think that you're buddy, and then kind of slack off a little bit and say some things that might be so appropriate in an interview. You don't ever want to offend anybody, and you also want to show that you're professional. Let's see. And then also, I like to talk a little bit about questions that you can ask for the employer. You always want to go in advance and have some questions in mind that you want to ask the employer towards the end of the interview, which Matt will probably touch on a little bit more. And you want to do your research. You want to do your homework. You want to make sure that you know what the client does. You want to know that you know who you're going to be interviewing with. One thing that I like to do for my candidates is I always send them an email with information with the company website. Even sometimes they have a YouTube page that I'll send them, and definitely their LinkedIn page. So it's important that you get on there, you do your homework, find out what products, what services they offer, what are their most popular products, really educate yourself so that when you go in there to talk to them, they can know that you're interested in their job and their products and what they do and what their mission is. Well, another thing I was going to say is, as far as LinkedIn, when you get on the LinkedIn page for the company, you can go down to people and you can usually find the people you're going to be interviewing with and look at their profiles as well. I think that's good because you can kind of get an idea of what they do, what their position is in the company. And I think that's really helpful too, to just be aware of what they're doing and be aware, or I guess be more prepared to talk to them. I feel like you can kind of get to know a little bit about them before you get on the interview. Sorry, I'm working off two different screens. I have to look over here. And let's see. Oh, and then some common questions for interview preparation. There's so many different questions they can ask, obviously, but some really common ones are usually, make sure you're prepared to talk about your current or most recent position. You want to be prepared to talk about some great things that you've done for the company and how you've been able to have some successes there. You do need to brag about yourself a little bit, so be confident, but also you want to be humble at the same time. You don't want to go overboard and bragging too much, but you want to show them what you've done and how you've been successful. Couple of different questions that I've always seen people ask, just in general, like personality wise, culture wise, they'll ask, tell me about a time when you've had a project that failed, how did you deal with that? What was the situation? How would you avoid this in the future? That's definitely something I see a lot. And also tell me a time that you had an issue with a team member or maybe an angry customer. How did you resolve that issue? And also, prepare specific examples of success stories that will showcase the impact you've made on any recent projects or with your current or previous employers. There's going to be 3 parts to sharing these examples. Make sure you always state specifically what the problem is or what the project was, what the goal is, and what the process is that you use to either create something or to resolve the problem, and what were the end results. You always want to use those 3 parts so that the interviewer has a clear idea of what the situation was. And also make sure that you try to keep it short. Don't ramble. Make sure you stay focused when you're giving these examples. And I'd like to ask actually some of you guys, does anybody else have any other common interview questions that you've been asked that you'd like to share with the group? No? Okay. We can always talk about that at the end as well. Let's see.
Sorry, I actually have one. This is Haas. A question that I was asked during a recent interview was, so you're given a project, there is virtually no information about it. How do you go about managing that project and ensuring that it's successful?
Yeah, I mean, I like that. So that's definitely a good question. I think that you could be prepared for as well. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have one that that somebody asked me in an interview, and then I picked up and started asking in interviews that I do, particularly for people at the senior level. And the setup for the question is something like this. Once you're hired, imagine you're given an opportunity to teach a 1-hour workshop or lunch and learn once a week for the next 10 weeks to just explain the things that you think are most important about being a successful software developer. Give us an example of what your outline would be for that set of workshops. And it provides a lot of opportunity to dive into the various things, both technical or hard skills and soft skills that somebody thinks might be important in being successful as a software developer. And then as they bring things up, you can dive deeper one more step and say, okay, well, how have you implemented that, or how do you do that or show that skill in the job you have now? So that's a question that I think can provide some rich discussion.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really like that. I think that's really helpful for everyone to be prepared for.
And now you all know my secret question, so I'm going to have to find a new one.
I like it.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is basically like right before the interview, how do you prepare, I guess, kind of like psychologically for the interview? You want to mentally prepare, obviously. And you also want to make sure, like, grab a drink, grab a small bite to eat if you need to, Also, this also has, I guess, can be different if you're going in person to interview or versus online or over the phone, right? So, but make sure you take a chance, use the restroom, make sure that you take 10 minutes to get mentally in the zone. Something that I like to do before I've done interviews in the past is I have a specific playlist I like to listen to that has songs that really pump me up and make me feel like I'm in the zone and I'm super excited and confident to go in and kick some butt on this interview. So that's something I like to do. Some people like to maybe do a few jumping jacks, get energized, and just be ready to get in the zone of the interview. I've also heard people say this, and I think it's kind of fun, is they suggest that you stand in like the Superman position or the Wonder Woman position for about a minute before you go in. So if you're, taking the elevator up, maybe you stand in the elevator like Superman. It's supposed to make you feel really confident. So I thought that was kind of a fun idea. But also, I think a really big thing is just make sure that you don't overthink it. Be yourself, relax and let your personality show through. People want to know that you're a real person and they want to get to know the real you. So make sure that you let that show through. And that is all I have. So.
Great. Gary, if you want me to just continue, I can do so. I think you're on mute, Gary.
Yeah, go right ahead, and then we'll get to some of the questions from the chat when you're finished.
Yeah, so Angie, thanks so much. And also Tech Systems, thank you so much for that information. So I'm Matt Nelson. I'm with Software Technology Group as well. And I've been in the tech industry for 6 years. And it's amazing how much I've learned in 6 years with me being at Software Technology Group, we actually get to sit in interviews with our candidates. And when we sit in, we don't say a word, but we just observe. It's such a great opportunity for us to do that because we get to give we get to give our own feedback to our candidates that we're seeing what they're doing, and also we get that feedback quickly. So I wanted to first address something that Truly said. Obviously, everybody gets nervous in interviews, And the greatest thing that we can do to prepare for interviews and being nervous and maybe saying the wrong thing is just practicing. Practice, practice, practice. That is where we can become more confident in what we're saying. I even practice interviewing with other people before I go in an interview, and practice with family or practice with friends. And so truly, I would suggest practicing an interview with someone you may know. Go through some questions, maybe go through some technical questions. That might be something of worth. And I think someone had mentioned adding something to a resume. Gary, I think it was yours as well, but I actually took a Toastmasters class one time. This was probably about 10 years ago. Toastmasters is an opportunity where you give speeches to people, and you basically can go through these speeches and you really learn how to speak well. And it also helps your interviewing skills. And so if you've never heard of Toastmasters, I would encourage you to go look at that. It's such a wonderful thing to get involved with that, and you get to meet people and really become comfortable with yourself. And so I'm excited to talk about interviewing and what to do and maybe what not to do. The most important thing you can do in your interview in the beginning is introducing yourself. Now, I've been in interviews where people introduce themselves for 10, 15 minutes, and it is just not the right approach. Maybe if you have a 4-hour interview and you have different people you're speaking to, kind of look at the room and adjust of, what would make sense. I suggest if you're introducing yourself and they say, so Matt or whoever you're talking to, introduce yourself. I recommend you introduce yourself in 2 to 3 minutes and make it short. And what I always like to do is make it tailored towards the position that you're interviewing for. So if you're interviewing for a technical product manager, bring your passion into why you love product management, and maybe say a couple personal things about what you love to do in your free time, your family or where you're from, but make it short. Make it short so you give enough time for the interviewers to ask questions of you. If you go into the weeds and you go into a full history, your interviewers are going to be a little bit lost, and the view or the atmosphere of the interview is going to be different. So I recommend you do 2 to 3 minutes of introducing yourself, and be prepared. I've encouraged my candidates to practice in giving an introduction of themselves. Write it down. Write 2 to 3 sentences of who you are, and then you will know what to say when you're given that question. Now, this may be different for on-site interviews or for video interviews. Some people, when they start an interview, maybe they don't ask you to introduce yourself. They may ask you to go into your experience right away. And so you may want to prepare that as well. And when you prepare and when you give your experience, make it short. Keep it short to keep the attention of the interviewers. If you have 5 years of experience to explain to an interviewer, make it short, make it applicable to the position you're applying for, and maybe accentuate a couple things that you've done well in your past roles or your past companies that you've been with. And so let's see with that. And then once you give your introduction, you may want to ask the interviewer, is there anything else you'd like to know more about that introduction? Or is there anything else you'd like to know more about my background? Then that gives them the opportunity to say, no, let's continue on. And so, Ange, why don't you go to the next slide here? So the meat of the interview are questions. So like Ange mentioned, be prepared with questions. Be prepared to have 3 or 4 situational questions. As you know, situational questions can be super, super awkward or very uncomfortable, where they say, tell me a time when you had an issue come up with your development team where you needed to resolve a problem. How did you do it, and what did you do to resolve it? And so I love to practice those situational questions so you can remember the details. And like I said, I would have maybe 3 to 4 situational questions all ready to go. And be ready to talk about how personally you made an impact with your past businesses or past experiences. And then I would also be prepared with follow-up questions. So if they describe a project and you have some follow-up questions, make sure you have those questions in mind. Now, just some example questions. I always encourage my candidates, what's your biggest concern or problem with the current project you have? So it's interesting when you go into an interview and the interviewers already have a problem that they need solved. So what a better way for the person interviewing to ask about a problem that the company may be having. So it's a great opportunity for you to expand on your skills of how you can help resolve their problem. That's one question I recommend you always ask. Find out what the team is doing. Find out what they're doing well. Find out what they're struggling with. And I feel like that's super important for you to find out, because then when the interview comes to an end, you can resolve something with knowing what their problem is. You can resolve it by saying, hey, I excel with this. I know how to manage a team. I know how to come with, being prepared as a developer or whatever position you're applying for. Now, another question that I love is, what does a typical day look like for someone on your team? And then they describe exactly what you're doing with the team. They describe, what you'd be doing individually. And it's so important that you come hungry with questions. And some interviews I've sat in, this developer gives a full length history of what they're doing. And then towards the end, the interviewers say, well, do you have any other questions? And they say, no, I'm good. I feel like I have everything. I was like, that is definitely not the right approach. Even if you've described so many things, you need to have some follow-up questions towards the end. Now, there's one thing you want to avoid. Now, when you're interviewing, I would avoid any lifestyle choices, politics, religion, family, or any health history that you've had. It's so difficult to recover from describing something negative that you've had happen to you in a past company. Now, someone brought up layoffs. Someone brought up being laid off by a company. That is very difficult to talk about. Now, from personal experience, I've been let go from companies, and recruiters or hiring managers always ask about it. The thing you want to do most effectively is just be positive and say, you know what, they did a reduction and this is what happened. But the great thing is, it helped me learn something new. It helped me learn that I need to grow in these areas, and it gives the interviewer an opportunity to see how you respond to that. They may say, and that's why you want to avoid negativity. You say, oh, I hated this company, they let me go, and I just didn't like working there anywhere. Well, that's not going to do you any good. And so hopefully that answers one of your questions there. So Angela, your next slide. Do we have time for a little experience from getting laid off, or should we wait until the end, Gary?
I think we have time for an experience.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you for bringing that up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I was part of a reduction in force about 5 years ago at a company. In interviewing for that at my current job, that question was asked, like, why are you looking for a job? I addressed it head on, just as I was part of a layoff, and it was that brief and simple, honestly. And I now work at that company, and have since been told by coworkers that interviewed with me, there was other people from my company interviewing there as well that kind of tiptoed around the subject and tried to kind of avoid it. I just addressed it head on, and my honesty was valued and respected, and honestly was part of what landed me the current position.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I think sometimes we want to tiptoe around it because we don't want to look weak. And I've tiptoed around it as well, because it's an awkward conversation, because you're like, hey, I want to showcase my skills here, and this is who I truly am. But I'm so glad that you were honest there. I feel like you're honest in a way that they see that you're honest and you want to be upfront. So great question there.
Yeah,
so,
and one other thing I would just add real quick. I think that's an easy one to answer right now. There's been so many layoffs that you be direct about it and just say, hey, I was a part of a reduction in force. Nobody's going to judge you for that right now, given the current market and all the layoffs that have been happening. It just is what it is.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Well, we're coming down to the end of the interview. So there's so many ways that if you actually go on YouTube, you see a lot of people coaching about interviewing skills, and that's great too. One thing that I encourage my candidates, or I encourage any friends or family that I give interview advice to, one question that you ask towards the end. Now read the room, read how the hiring managers are looking at you. If they feel, if they look confused, or if they look like they're wanting more information, then this is my question I love to ask. I say, is there anything in my background that you may not feel 100% confident with? I asked this in a sales interview once, and the interviewers looked at me and says, I've never been asked that before. And they pause for a minute and says, I don't know what really to say. And so it kind of stumped them in some way, but it was so important for me to question them is like, I really want to know if you feel like I have some weaknesses, because if I have some weaknesses, that's a perfect opportunity for you to respond and say, you know, you may think of that, but let me describe where I've learned to overcome this. It gives you an opportunity to sell yourself. You're not selling yourself just once in the interview. You're selling yourself 5 or 6 times. And it's so important that you sell yourself in the right way. And I feel like this is also a humble approach, that you want to know what you're weak at. That way you can describe and you can sell what you can improve on. And sometimes they won't say anything, and that's fine too. And then I also, after you ask that and they're like, you know, this has been great, then I would say, I have really enjoyed this interview. I would love to know what the next steps are from here. Can you explain what those next steps look like? And they may say, like, you know, we're interviewing a lot of other candidates. Great. Well, I hope this has been a great company to learn about. I'm really excited to know of next steps. And then you thank them for their time. And if there's an opportunity where you guys can grab the hiring manager's email, it's so important to send a thank you note. I would encourage everybody to send a thank you note, even if you can find it on LinkedIn, or if you can find a way to do it. I always appreciate a thank you note. And everybody loves thank you notes, and hiring managers, they love them. Now, when you write your thank you note, address 3 things maybe in the interview that you thought went well, and where you can contribute your skills. Now, if there's something in the interview that they were uncertain about, maybe you can clarify that in your thank you note, and you can say, hey, this is what we talked about. This is where I feel like I can improve, and I can feel like I can add value to the team. So that is, interviewers are so great, and the more interviews you get involved with, the better you get. And I would encourage feedback from interviews if you practice them, and you can always get feedback from asking it. And if you continue to ask feedback, you will get better, and then you will land more positions. And these are great experiences. So that's all I have.
Great, thank you. And thanks to all of our presenters. A couple of things. I want to direct your attention to the chat. To begin with, relevant to the interviews, I've just posted a link to one of my favorite posts. As somebody who does a lot of interviewing, I'm always shocked when I'm interviewing a candidate and they really have no questions for me. Whether it be a first interview that's more of a screening interview, or a second, more technical interview, not having good questions for your interviewer is a serious red flag to me as a hiring manager. This post that I shared in the chat about questions you should ask your interviewer, certainly don't ask all 10. That would also be a red flag. But there are some great questions in there, including some things that I think are really important, show a lot of engagement, and thinking beyond just trying to get the job and actually being successful in the job. Questions like, how do you measure the success, or how do you measure the performance of the person in the role that you're hiring for? And what would you if I was hired, what would you expect me to accomplish in my first 6 months or in my first year? Those really do show some engagement, and that you're thinking past the actual interview stage. In addition to that link in the chat, I'm going to paste this again. If you need to drop off early, we're going to have some open discussion. I'm going to go back through the chat and pick up some questions from earlier and raise those. But if you need to drop off early, we will be doing a drawing for some prizes. The way you enter the drawing for the prizes is by going to the link that I just pasted, tinyurl.com/SLC prize. That is case sensitive, and fill out our feedback form for our presenters, and that will enter you for the drawing for our prizes. And then the last thing before we go back to some open questions or questions from the chat would be, it's likely you'll have more questions more questions or more ideas, or just want to network. So we do have a Slack channel, and we would invite you all to join our Slack. And you can keep the conversation going. You can also get information about future meetups, and so we would love to have you on our Slack. With that said, I'm going to go back up and scroll back up and take a look at a couple of questions. I have a question from Ron, and also a question from Haas, and they're kind of related. So I'm going to kind of combine them, and I think we can have them answered all at once. So the questions were: do you have to put all of the jobs you've worked on your resume, or just the ones that are relevant to the position you're applying for? As well as Haas said, I worked with a resume writer 2 years ago, and she asked me not to include work experience that exceeds the last 10 years. Is that a hard and fast rule? So kind of the combination of that question is where do you cut off the items that you put on your resume, and what's kind of the criteria for what you include? So I'm going to open that up to Chelsea, and I forgot the name of your compatriot there, but open that up to our friends from Tech Systems first, and then also if Matt or Angie, if you want to chime in as well, it's kind of open forum time, so we'd love answers from anybody.
Yeah, I would say I think it's hard to say a completely hard and fast rule. You know, there's like the don't exceed anything more than 10 years because you want it to be relevant. But at the same time, you know, if you're, you know, changing gears, you're switching careers, you might want to include the things that you were doing from before because they could still have benefits to what you're looking for. So it's difficult, at least for me, to say the hard and fast rule, but you want it to be as relevant to what you're looking for, but don't take off too much to where it doesn't look like you have any experience at all.
Yeah.
Definitely a balancing act.
Yeah. How about our friends from STG? Do you have any responses to this question?
No, I think what they have mentioned is accurate. Obviously, we at STG, we have resume formatters for us, and they format the resume and give pointers to what we can do more effectively. I have heard before that to not go past 10 years, and then you can put a little addition in your resume if more experience requested. They can always ask that. So I think not too much to complement what they had mentioned.
Great. I want to add, as somebody who has clearly not updated his Just for Men on the beard and showing a little gray around the sides. I don't know that 10 years is a hard and fast rule, but definitely in tech, and I think just about any job, as you get older, you do run into the possibility of there being some ageism, and so there are some advantages to dropping some things off. I mean, I've now taken my Fox Pro and my Visual Basic and my ASP Classic and various other old technologies off of my resume. That doesn't mean I wouldn't be willing to work in those technologies, but I don't want to highlight to somebody necessarily that I don't want to highlight that I'm over 50. I want my resume to get me the interview. When they look at me, they're going to know I'm a little older, but I've already got a foot in the door and an opportunity to explain how my skills are relevant to the job. So that's my personal advice on resumes, particularly if you're an older job seeker. Does anybody from the group have a comment on cutting off or deciding which skills to add to your resume?
I have kind of an input. This was something that I worked with somebody who's a resume writer recommended me. He said that sometimes you might have job roles that are relevant. I come from a consulting background, I was in the consulting world but came into full-time role. But coming from that, so you kind of jump different contracts, so you have different roles you performed. So what he mentioned was take the roles that are relevant to the position, but also don't leave out blank, empty, like in sense, like if there are employment gaps, people ask about employment gaps. So that is something that you can always mention the role, but not the entire skill set. You might have to just mention a little bit about it and then leave it up so that you can reduce space. So that's something like if you have worked as an architect and you jumped as a different role again and he came back. So you might have to explain that. So at least for that explanation, you can put that in the resume to have a conversation point on that.
Great, thank you. I want to point out before we get to the next question, I did want to point out something that Kayla brought up. If you've set up for an interview, a remote interview, an online interview, confirm the time zone, be very careful. I mean, most invites now include the time zone adjustment, but it's still important to double check and be on time. We had a question from Carl. What advice can you give for negotiating a higher salary after an offer? Anybody from our panel who'd like to take that?
I think this is such a great question because so many people have it at the top of their minds. And I've had a lot of candidates negotiate the salary. So I think, first of all, so I'm going to be speaking from an agency standpoint here. So when we interview candidates, we talk about their salary requirements and we really get down to what exactly are they hoping for. And so we really understand what they're worth, what they want to put down as far as what their salary requirements are. We really nail those down so the client is understood of, this is what they want. And some people, when they do get that offer, we think that we know what their range is, but then they do want to, compete with the market out there. I would just give some advice here that knowing just some advice of, what your salary needs to be or how much worth it is. I would definitely know what you're worth. And I've had some developers come to me and they've had 3 years of experience and they want 150. And it's so apparent of how many people want to shoot for the moon. And so my advice to you is just understand your experience. And obviously if the offer is low and lower than what you were requesting, that's definitely open for negotiation. Now, if it's stretching way up there, I would just be very careful that you understand, like I said in the beginning, of how much you're worth to go for that number. And I will just give some advice as well. If you're seeking a super high salary, just keep in mind that there may be some expectations from the company if you're going to be in a higher salary bracket of what they're expecting. Don't know if that's helpful, but there's just a lot of different ways that you can negotiate a salary. I would be starting out, if you do get an offer, obviously thank them first, and then think very carefully about how you want to approach them about raising that offer.
Yeah, if I could make a comment too. Know, and this sometimes is hard, but know how you did in the interview. Right? So right now I'm one of the lead tech interviewers for our company. So I'm interviewing multiple people a week, and most of them have a pretty good idea how they're doing in an interview. But there are some where they don't know what they don't know. So you need to be able to recognize that if you had to go into detail on any single question, how deep could you go? Because if you can go deep, that means you answered the question correctly. But when you don't, realize that, because that becomes a negotiation tactic. So at my last company, I went into the interview and I nailed it, and I knew I nailed it. And I was able to have that discussion. It's like, well, this is what I'm looking for. And they were honest. They're like, well, to be honest, we can't meet that. And this is where I currently work. So we had a discussion. They're like, well, it's like, we know our salaries aren't what they should be. It's like, you were a very good candidate. And then from there, they said, but these are the things that we can do. And they're like, I can't technically promise this, but what I've seen from the company is that if you are as good as we believe you are, you will have no problem getting, X raises and so on and so forth. And that gave me enough confidence where I went ahead and said, okay, I did eventually accept the position, despite the salary not being there. But it did work out well. And because we had that conversation, there wasn't anything left on the table to discuss. It was, they couldn't meet it and I had to make a choice. But it can work out even if you don't get that.
Thanks. Mohan, is your comment about the salary negotiation?
No, I had a question.
You had another
related to
question.
that.
Go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, so at what point is it okay to ask like what does the position base salary or anything of that nature before like the initial stage of the recruitment process, or do you wait till you go through the interview, at the end of the interview then you ask the question? Like you have sometimes you have multiple rounds of interviews, right? You have initially you talk to the recruit or the person who's posted the position, and then you talk to the next hiring manager, and then you have to discuss with the team, and then eventually come back to HR. Sometimes series of so when is the right time to ask? Is it okay to ask upfront, or is it something that you have to wait out through the entire process, then you're asking?
So I'm interested to hear a couple of different opinions on this. So I think we'll start with Chelsea. What do you think about when is it appropriate to ask about the salary?
So for me, I generally expect to be asked that question right off the bat. So I like to set those expectations first, mostly because if the salary for the position that I'm looking for or that I'm working on, and the person I'm reaching out to, if they're already making like, say, $40,000 more, they're going to want to know what that salary is before I have them get to an interview. Because if they interview and they don't know, that's going to cause issues. So I personally, it's one of the first things I do when I'm having a conversation with someone about a position, is setting expectations, generally asking the candidate that I'm working with what their expectations are, and then leading into either this position that I have fits that, or I can find something that does.
Great. Angie, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Chelsea. When I do initial interviews, I definitely, that's something we discuss in the very first interview, because I want to make sure that we're both on the same page. It's important to have open communication about salary. I know it's always a hard topic to discuss, but if we're looking at specific jobs, I'll always ask, first of all, what is your goal salary, and what's your nice to have, and what's your goal salary? And then I kind of know what jobs to look for people for. I can kind of get an idea for what they would accept, what they would be okay with or comfortable with. But I also want to make sure that they're getting what they want, but at the same time, we have to kind of find that middle ground. So I definitely think it's good to find this out from the beginning so that we can all be on the same page.
Yeah, excellent. I'm going to skip Matt for a second, although you may get a chance to weigh in on this as well. I wanted to share my experience. So the experience may be a little bit different if you're a recruiter who may be working middleman a little bit between the job seeker and the company. I work for a company that generally doesn't use recruiters and is about 50-50 in our job postings about whether we include a salary range. And it's my preference on the hiring side that we include a salary range in all postings. And in a lot of jurisdictions in the United States now, it's becoming a legal requirement that you post the salary range. My advice would be, if the salary range is super low, then you're right. It probably doesn't make any sense to necessarily even apply. But I've been through 2 hires where I'm at now, where the ask from the candidate during that negotiating period was at or above the top of our expected salary range. And kind of like the experience that Caleb had, we were able to say, well, this person pretty much knocked it out of the park in our technical interview, and we think they're going to be a great fit And so sometimes it's possible we may have opened a position for a software engineer, but it may be possible for us to reclassify that position as a senior software engineer or as a software architect. And by reclassifying our open position, bring the person on in a team at a salary that's commensurate with the experience that they have. I wanted to ask Caleb on the hiring side of a company doing direct hiring, what's your experience been with, and what's your opinion about when you get asked the salary question from candidates?
We now have a multi-phase interview process, and I'm only doing the technical, so I don't actually have an answer for you on that.
All right. And that's true. I mean, I'm actually the first phase on a lot of our interviews. And so I have no problem with being asked in the first interview. I mean, that's a great question, in my opinion, at the end of the first interview. I know that you'll see some job sites and or job seeker advice that'll say, oh, don't ask about salary in the first interview. But my time is incredibly valuable. And I believe that your time as a job seeker is incredibly valuable. 1 hour or 45 minutes or so for an initial interview, I don't think is hardly ever a waste of time. But going beyond that, I want to make sure that we're on the same page. So if we haven't done if we haven't posted the salary and the job opening at the end of that first interview, I would expect the question, and I would hope that anybody that I interview with, if I'm seeking a job, would be ready to answer that question if I asked them about the salary at the end of the first question. So I am going to, I think we answered some questions. We answered questions about the layoffs, and we answered questions about being nervous. If you had follow-ups to those, give me a chance to ask this next question, and then you can raise your hand and we'll ask follow-ups to those questions. But the last question we have in the chat right now is, what if you changed careers? Should you add that work experience that has practically no relevance to the role for which you're applying? Who from our panel would like to take that? Oh, I guess we skipped Matt on the last question. So Matt, would you like to take that? If you've changed careers, how do you handle your work experience and building relevance to the role for which you're applying?
That's a great question. And I think I would start with, it depends on how much experience you have in the industry. So, I mean, if you're more of a junior level candidate, it just really depends. So, but if you're changing careers and you've had a lot of other experience, but then if it applies to what maybe the role that you're applying for, I don't see why it would hurt to put that in your resume. I mean, if you're applying towards something that deals with some of the past industry you've done with, I think there's no harm in putting that on your resume. But at the same time, I would get feedback from other people. I would get feedback from a recruiter. I would get feedback from a mentor that you may have and say, hey, I'm applying for this type of job. Does this resume look, presentable for this type of position I'm going after? So hopefully that answers.
Great, thanks.
The one thing, if I could say one thing.
Yep.
If you're creative enough, almost everything can apply to a job.
Yeah.
Right. I was working with some younger kids, right? People getting ready to go out and do their first interviews. And I asked them a question about like team building. And they're like, why would we have experience with this? I was like, how many of you have played a multiplayer game online? And like all of them raised their hands. And I was like, and what happens if one of those people on your team doesn't do their job? And of course, they could go off on that, right? So it's just realizing that we have a lot of experiences in life. And if we look at them right, they are applicable to lots of jobs and to all of the different things that people care about.
Excellent. So yeah, in the chat, I was about to post this in the chat, but Ron asked a follow-up about what about if you excluded, is that okay? And my response to that would be, yeah, it is okay to exclude past jobs, past experience, as long as you don't end up leaving a large resume gap. But to echo what Caleb just said, I think it's much better if you can find a way to gently spin your experience towards towards the job that you're seeking. And again, we in the tech world, we focus an awful lot on the hard skills. You know, do you know all the extension methods for link? Do you know the particular edge cases of using arrays, or how does floating point math work, or any of the other great questions that Caleb's going to want to ask you as he dives in on the tech side of the interview. What's the page life cycle in a web application and things like that. We forget how important some of the soft skills are in getting a job too. And a lot of times those past job experiences you have that may not be tech heavy may be soft skills heavy, and you can spin those. I don't know who had their hands up first, Alex or Has, but Alex is in the top corner of my screen, so we'll let Alex go next.
Just a comment on salaries. For any Utah public employees, you can look up their salary online. So if you know someone that's worked there, you can look up what they're actually make.
I can, that is a good point. And I can tell you, as a former public employee up until about 5 months ago, you do have to be careful with that. It is an interesting thing when you talk about salaries, is also being able to accurately compare the benefits. When you look at the salaries on that transparent.utah.gov, it's going to show, in addition to the salary, it's going to show roughly a 12 or 13% pension contribution, as well as it's going to include all the employer benefits that you may not be thinking about that get paid in on your behalf, but don't normally show up on your paycheck. So
they've recently, they split that out now, so you have wages and the benefits, so you see both of them.
Yeah, I'm just saying it can be tough it can be tough. It's a great resource, but it can be tough. Having tried to compare my previous salary to what actually shows up in my check or showed up in my check, it's not always the easiest thing. And there are other surveys. BLS.gov does actual surveys of employers and has actual statistically valid wages, which are a little bit better, in my opinion, than the self-reported Indeed or Glassdoor salaries or things like that. It includes a broader range, a statistically representative sample of employees as well. Haas, what did you have to add?
Yeah, so I've been in this situation a couple of times, and one of the more recent times was I was being pre-screened for this position. Now, I already had it in; I'd worked there before, but as a contractor, so I could have pretty much been a shoo-in for this position. But when I went through the recruitment phase, where they're asking general questions and salary ranges came up, I usually played that question cautiously. I'll always ask, what is the range? And in this instance, they're like, oh, there's no range. And I'm just like, I was willing to be flexible because I really wanted this job. But at the end of the day, I was cornered into giving a range as to what I was looking for. And I went based on a review that I saw on Glassdoor as to what that company pays for that actual title, for that position. It turned out that I was way off, and I didn't even make it past the pre-screening phase, where, I mean, I was just really mad that I literally got, I didn't even make it through the front door, and I literally scared, them off by thinking that I was too expensive, where I said I'm negotiable, but this is, what I mean, what I would like. And I don't know, when you ask for a range, aren't they required to give you a range? I guess it's the real question here, because I got really frustrated. I get really frustrated when recruiters or hiring managers say, oh, we don't have a range. I mean, which is bogus. There's always a range.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, in the United States, in most places, they're not legally required to give you a range. And I think that's I personally think that's an unfortunate situation. And somebody who has an open position who's not willing to provide a range at the end of the first interview or between a first interview and second interview, it's somebody that I would strongly consider walking away from. It's just not, it's not worth it to me if they don't have an idea. So I don't know, do any of our presenters have a different opinion or feel strongly about that? Yeah, I got thumbs up from everybody.
I think Liam and I were kind of just like mentioning back and forth to each other that we very much like just agree with that. I mean, we know the salaries for every open position that our company has. So if anyone were to ever ask us, we do have an answer. The only times we ever don't is maybe they're like, hey, can you guys do some work for us and talk to people and get us what people in that market in like this years of experience are asking for. That's the only time I would say I've seen it where we don't have a number. But generally we're making phone calls. We're asking like, hey, you're the type of candidate we're looking for. What do you need? And then we take that back and then we talk through it, but we still keep them, very in on what our process is. But I would say 99% of the time we do have a salary range. I know both Liam and I will put it in our LinkedIn messages to people. We'll tell them on the phone. We have absolutely no problem telling them what our ranges are. And then asking whoever we're talking to what they do need. I think Angie mentioned this earlier. What's your goal salary? And then what do you need? Or like, what would you be comfortable accepting at, so that we know as well. So I feel like it goes both ways. I would like a candidate to tell me what they want, and I will be as upfront as I can about whatever salary ranges we have.
I think the only exception to that 99% is maybe a principal level or architect position. They have lots of upwards mobility usually if they're trying to find the right person. So other than architect or principal level though, they should have the salary range. They should know it.
Yeah, great. So I did want to give our presenters a chance. First of all, I wanted to thank our presenters for that work and effort they put into to building the slides, building slide deck, and preparing for sharing their expertise with us tonight. Clearly, we don't intend this to be a sales pitch for Tech Systems and STG, but we definitely appreciate their support and sponsorship of our group. I did want to give one person from each company the chance to answer a quick question, just a quick answer of, we may have people that are looking for work right now in the group. What would you say are the key advantages of reaching out to a recruiter for help as a job seeker? Let's have Angie. Angie, you and Matt can rock, paper, scissors if you want, but if you're prepared to answer that, Angie, you can go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that there's, I don't know, maybe Matt's better to answer this question. He's a little more experienced than I am, but I think that there's definitely, yeah, let's let Matt answer. I think he'll know better than me. I'm sorry.
All right, go ahead.
You're fine, Edge. I think I get so many requests from people looking for a job. I think when someone reaches out to me genuinely and says, I'm looking for a job and I see your experience in recruiting, and they genuinely ask for an opportunity to connect and to have an interview with me, I take them all the time. And I'm one of those recruiters that I will interview anybody. And it's an opportunity for me to give everyone a chance. And so that is how I approach it. If you're friendly, if you approach a recruiter and make your pitch, very short but very respectful, and ask that they respect their time, I hope that recruiter would reach out to you and say, let's plan an interview. And so that is my approach to anybody that's reaching for a job, is that you definitely have something to add. And so that's why I interview almost everybody that reaches out to me. So that's my opinion. Someone else may think differently, but as long as you do it in a respectful way and you leave your contact information, you leave your resume as well, you give the recruiter everything that you can provide so that the recruiter can look at your resume and they can glance at it and say, okay, let's have an interview and let's do it. Because if you don't leave your contact information, that's one more step a recruiter has to make and the busy schedule of their lives throughout the day. If you give everything up front, they can schedule an interview that fast. And so that's what advice I would give you is when you reach out, give all your contact information if you're comfortable doing that.
Great. So Chelsea, I think when you were doing your presentation, you actually touched on this a little bit, but basically same question to you. What do you see as the key advantages if as a job seeker for reaching out to a recruiter for help finding a job?
Yeah, I'm going to let Liam take this one.
Excellent.
In my opinion, the biggest advantage is just having someone else on your side. Us recruiters, we're going to walk you through the whole process. We're going to review your resume and make sure that it's dialed in. We're going to prep you for the interview. So it's just another resource to have on hand that's going to help you. In my opinion, it helps you have a better shot at getting the job because we know what the hiring managers are looking for. We know how the interviews look, and we just have a lot of good insider tips that we can give to the candidates. So that's my take.
Great. Thank you. So I just once again, I want to thank our presenters. I'm going to end the YouTube right now. Hans, your hand is still up. So as I end this, if you still had a question or comment, you can go ahead and ask that.